My name is Lena Marsh, and I am 31 years old, and I want to tell you about the Sunday afternoon my family called a meeting to tell me they knew what I had done. I had not done anything. That is not the part of this story that is interesting. The part that is interesting is the 6 weeks they spent building and refining a theory without once checking the actual record, and what happened in Richard's living room when the actual record was finally consulted by someone with the authority to read it aloud. My grandmother passed away 8 months before that Sunday. Her name was May, and she was 74 years old, and she had lived alone in a small house she owned outright and had managed her finances with the same disciplined independence she had applied to every other area of her life. She had 2 adult children, my mother, whose name is Grace, and my uncle Richard, who is 3 years younger than my mother, and who has always been the kind of person who treats thoroughness as something other people do while he makes decisions based on what seems correct to him in the moment. My grandmother had 4 grandchildren. I am the eldest. In the last 3 years of her life, my grandmother had asked me to help her with her banking administration, not her decisions, her administration. She was entirely capable of making her own financial decisions, and she made them clearly and deliberately until the very end of her life. What she had found increasingly difficult was the online banking interface, which her bank had redesigned twice in 2 years in ways that made it significantly harder for older users to navigate. The buttons had moved, the layout had changed, the security verification had been updated to a 2-step process that required switching between 2 apps on a phone, which she found frustrating and time-consuming. She asked me if I would help her when I visited on Tuesday afternoons. I sat with her at her kitchen table, and I helped her complete the transactions she had already decided on, transferring between her accounts, paying bills she had reviewed, checking balances she was tracking. I did not make decisions. I did not redirect funds. I did not initiate anything she had not already told me she wanted done. I was the hands on the keyboard. She was the mind and the authority behind every single action. Before I tell you what my family decided about this arrangement, please hit like and subscribe and drop your city in the comments. After my grandmother died, the estate went through the standard process without incident. There was a will, it was clear, and everything was distributed as she had specified. My uncle Richard received his share, my mother received hers, and each of the 4 grandchildren received the amount my grandmother had set aside for us individually. The process took 3 months from death to final distribution, which is normal, and nothing about it was contested or unusual. What happened afterward was not something I had anticipated, because it had not occurred to me that the people closest to me were capable of what followed. 3 weeks after the estate was fully settled, Richard called my mother and told her he had been going through my grandmother's bank statements from the last 3 years and had found a pattern of transfers he did not understand. He had not called me, he had not called the bank. He had called my mother, and over the following 3 weeks, the 2 of them had sat with the statements together, building a theory, talking through what they believed the transfers indicated, and arriving at a conclusion they held with increasing certainty the longer they discussed it without contradiction. The theory was that I had been using my access to my grandmother's online banking to redirect money into my own account. The statements showed a series of regular transfers, the same amount each month, going from my grandmother's primary account to an external account, identified on the statement only by the last 4 digits of the account number. Richard had totaled the transfers over 36 months. The sum was significant. He had not identified whose account the transfers went to beyond those 4 digits. He had assumed. My mother had agreed with the assumption. My cousin Dara, Richard's daughter, was told and aligned herself with it. My own brother Sam was called and told there was something to discuss at a family meeting, though not the specific nature of the accusation. By the time the meeting was arranged, 3 people had held this theory for 6 weeks, 6 weeks of discussing it, reinforcing it, and arriving at the shared certainty that comes not from evidence, but from the absence of anyone offering a different explanation. The meeting was set on a Sunday at Richard's house. I received a message from my mother on the Friday evening asking me to come. She said it was about the estate. She did not say which aspect. I came because I had nothing to hide, and therefore no reason not to. Richard's living room was arranged for the meeting in a way that told me immediately what kind of meeting this was going to be. There were 2 sofas facing each other. Richard and my mother sat on one. Dara was in the armchair to the side. Sam was on the other sofa with the space and posture of someone who has been told there is something important to discuss, but not what it is. I sat next to Sam. Richard had a manila folder on the coffee table in front of him with highlighted sections visible through the front cover. He had prepared this. He had organized it. He opened the meeting with the tone of someone who has been waiting a long time to say a thing and has finally arrived at the moment. He said, "Lena, we have been going through your grandmother's account statements, and we have identified a pattern of transfers that we cannot account for." He stated the total amount. He stated the time frame. He said, "We believe you used your access to redirect this money to yourself over the course of 3 years." He set the highlighted statements on the table and looked at me. I looked at him. I looked at my mother, who was looking at the folder rather than at me. I looked at Dara, who had her arms crossed with the expression of someone who has already decided. I looked at Sam, who was looking at the statements with a slight frown that suggested he was seeing them for the first time. I said one thing. I said, "Can you tell me the last 4 digits of the external account the transfers went to?" Richard looked at the highlighted statement. He read out the 4 digits. I said the account number they belonged to, in full. He looked up. I said, "That is my grandmother's secondary savings account at the same bank." I said she opened it 8 years ago when the interest rates on her primary account changed and her financial advisor suggested separating her long-term savings into a dedicated account. I said she transferred to it every month as part of her own self-directed savings plan that she had set up in branch with a personal banking advisor at the time of opening. I said I can give you the full account number if you would like to call the bank and confirm. Richard looked at my mother. My mother looked at the folder. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then I said, "I think we should call the bank manager together." I said it without raising my voice. I had the branch manager's name and direct number in my phone from the 3 in-person appointments I had attended with my grandmother. I said he will have the full account record and he will be able to confirm everything I have just said. Richard said he did not think that was necessary. I said, "I think it is." I said, "You have made a specific accusation and I would like it addressed with the same specificity you used when you made it." Sam said, "Lena's right." That was the first thing Sam had said in the entire meeting. Richard looked at him. Sam held the look. There was a pause that lasted longer than pauses usually last when everyone in the room is supposedly on the same side. Then Richard said, "Fine." I called the branch manager. His name was Mr. Osei, and he had managed the branch my grandmother used for 11 years. I had met him 3 times during appointments, and he had always been careful and precise in the way of someone who takes the responsibility of his position seriously. I explained briefly that I was with family members who had questions about my late grandmother's account history, and I asked whether he was able to speak to us about the account structure. He said he could speak generally about what was on record and asked me to hold while he pulled up the file. I put him on speaker. I set the phone on the coffee table between the 2 sofas. Mr. Osei confirmed the secondary savings account within the first 90 seconds. He confirmed it had been opened 8 years earlier in my grandmother's name alone, with no joint holders and no third-party access. He confirmed that she had established a standing monthly transfer from her primary account to the secondary as part of a self-directed savings plan that she had set up in branch with a personal banking advisor at the time of opening. He confirmed that the account had been included in the estate inventory and had been distributed to the beneficiaries along with all other assets according to the will. He confirmed that all access logs for the primary account showed all transactions during the period in question had been initiated either in branch by my grandmother or through the online platform using her own credentials, and that there was no record of any unauthorized third-party access, account modifications, or anomalous activity of any kind during the 3-year period. He said all of this in a clear, measured voice in approximately 4 minutes. When he finished, there was a silence in Richard's living room of a very specific quality. It was not the silence of people receiving surprising information. It was the silence of people having the thing they had not wanted to be true confirmed as true by a person whose professional role left no room for reinterpretation. I thanked Mr. Osei. I ended the call. I put my phone back in my bag. I looked at Richard. I looked at my mother. I did not say anything. I let the silence do what it needed to do. Sam said, "So there was nothing." He said it as a statement, not a question, and he was looking at Richard when he said it. Richard said, "We did not have all of the information." My mother said, "Lena, we were concerned. We were trying to protect the estate." I said, "I understand." I said it because it was the shortest, true thing I could say without adding anything that would have been true but not useful in that room that afternoon. In the months since that Sunday, I have made some adjustments to how I engage with my family that I want to describe accurately, because the accurate version is more honest and more useful than the version shaped by anger. I have not cut anyone off. I have not issued any kind of formal statement or ultimatum. I have not demanded an apology, though I have noticed whether one would arrive without my asking. My Uncle Richard sent me a text message 2 weeks after the meeting. It said, "I hope there are no hard feelings." That is not an apology. It is the message of someone who has decided that acknowledging the substance of what happened would be more uncomfortable than acknowledging the discomfort of not acknowledging it. I replied that I understood. I meant it as a description of the situation, not as an acceptance of it. My mother called me the following month. She said, "Families sometimes jump to conclusions when they are grieving." I said, "Yes." She said, "I hope we can move forward." I said, "I agree that we should." She seemed relieved. I was not trying to relieve her. I was being honest. I do want to move forward. What I am moving forward into is a relationship organized around what I now know clearly rather than what I previously assumed. What I know is that 3 members of my family spent 6 weeks building a case against me, told a 4th member there was something serious to discuss, convened a formal meeting, and did not ask me a single direct question at any point before presenting their conclusion to my face. That is not a small thing to know about people you are close to. It is not something I can unknow. I am not carrying it as anger. I processed the anger in the weeks following, and I set it down, because anger at a distance is expensive, and I had other things to spend my energy on. What I carry now is orientation. I know where the gaps are. I know who in my family reaches for an explanation before reaching for a conversation. I know who reaches for the phone to call the bank manager. I know which instinct I trust and which one I will be careful around. My grandmother's organized and documented life gave me something in the end beyond what she left in the will. It gave me a record that was clean and complete and that did not require me to defend it because Mr. Osei read it aloud in 4 minutes in a room full of people who had spent 6 weeks certain they already knew what was in it. The record was the answer. The record was always the answer. She had taught me that every Tuesday afternoon at her kitchen table. I had paid attention. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.